And speaking of negotiation, the next decision was taken without any. It's as unilateral as they come. I'm talking about Japan. Their government is releasing radioactive water from Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean. The process will start tomorrow. It could take decades to be completed. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited the Fukushima plant this week. He took stock of the preparations.
TEPCO is asked to swiftly prepare to start the water discharge in accordance with the plan approved by the Nuclear Regulation Authority. As for the specific release date, it is expected to be August 24, weather and sea conditions permitting.
But Japan's neighbors are not happy, especially China. They're calling this a selfish move.
It is blatantly transferring the risk of nuclear contamination to the whole world and putting its own selfish interests above the long-term well-being of all humankind. This is extremely selfish and irresponsible. China is gravely concerned about it and strongly opposes it.
Maybe China is concerned, or maybe they're just getting even. Last week, Japan and South Korea held a trilateral summit in the US at Camp David. Joe Biden hosted it. They had some tough words for China. Beijing was called aggressive and dangerous, so maybe this is tit for tat. But let's keep the politics aside. Let's focus on the science and the public reaction. The Fukushima nuclear plant is located around 250 kilometers from Tokyo. In 2011, it was hit by an earthquake and tsunami. The reactors were badly damaged. 3 of them had a nuclear meltdown. So what did authorities do? They used vast amounts of water to cool down the reactors to stabilize them. This wastewater was radioactive. So instead of dumping it, Japan had to store it. How much water are we talking about here? Around 1.3 million metric tons. It's enough to fill 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 500. This water is held inside 1,000 steel containers around the plant. Why is it being released now? Because Japan is running out of space. They need more water to completely decommission the plant. But for that, the existing wastewater must be dumped somewhere. How will they do it? The wastewater has already been treated. Most experts say it is not poisonous. It will be mixed with seawater and released into the ocean. Now, this water has just one radioactive isotope in it. It's called tritium. This isotope is pretty common. Even rainwater has it. So experts say the science checks out. The United Nations Atomic Watchdog has also signed off on it. They say the impact will be quote-unquote negligible. But tell that to the people. There are protests in China, in South Korea, in the Philippines and in Hong Kong. Fishermen in Japan are also protesting. Their logic is quite simple. If you release this water, no one will buy the fish. They will think it's poisonous. And it's hard to argue with that. The common man is not concerned about isotopes or tritium. They're concerned about the impact. Will it affect my life and business or not? That's all they care about. For many in Japan, the answer to those questions is yes.
I think it's unscientific at best to release it here, and it's sure to hurt sales of fish. That's why I'm strongly against it. I don't want them to do it.
I have some concerns about the Fukushima water release. If the government is really going to do it, I would like them to show more evidence that it won't have any effect on the environment.
I know it's too late now. Japan is all set to begin the release tomorrow. They have diluted some of the wastewater with seawater. If the weather permits, it will be released. So it's pointless to debate whether Japan should have done this or not. The science was solid, the reasons were justified, and the United Nations signed off. But how they did it is a different debate altogether. No consensus, no confidence building, no transparency. Surely there was a better way to do it. Japan could have spent more time and money building awareness, perhaps invite neighbors to see the ground reality, let them conduct tests. Instead, Japan decided to go it alone. One report from the UN watchdog is not enough. Such issues require more negotiations, more inspections. Only then can you build consensus. Japan did not bother with it. And as a result, they have set a bad example. What is stopping other countries from doing the same with nuclear wastewater? Well, after tomorrow, nothing. We're not saying Japan should store this water for eternity. We're saying build consensus. Maybe China would still have objected to the plan, but the fact is, we'll never know because Japan never tried. 12 years after the nuclear accident, Fukushima continues to teach us a lot on what not to do. A truce at the border with India will give China some breathing room. It will reduce tension. It will allow Beijing to focus on the bigger challenges that it faces, like their economy. The current downturn looks serious in China. Exports are down, real estate is in trouble, and millions are out of job. Even Huawei is struggling. The company has been a target of Western sanctions. Its access to raw materials remains restricted. So Huawei is taking some extreme measures. Reports say it has built a secret network to access some chips. The company is said to have set up secret facilities to fabricate semiconductor chips and avoid US sanctions. Our next report tells you more.
Huawei is back in the news for its backdoors. But this time, we're not talking about devices. The Chinese tech giant is now building a backdoor of a different kind. This one will help the company skirt international sanctions. Huawei is trying to get its hands on semiconductors or chips. They are the brain of modern-day devices. Huawei needs chips to make its devices, but it was blacklisted by the United States. So the company came up with a workaround. Last year, it made a move into chip production with Beijing's help. China armed Huawei with $30 billion in state funding. Where's the money going? It's being spent on a secret network of factories. Huawei is setting up chip-making facilities. The company has acquired 2 existing factories and is constructing 3 new facilities. But Huawei wants to keep these plans a secret. On paper, Huawei is not listed as the owner of these new plants. The facilities are being created by different companies. They don't share the same Huawei name. Neither does the tech giant own any shares. Reports say Huawei doesn't want to disclose its involvement. Again, the reason is Western sanctions. By hiding its name, Huawei might be able to circumvent the sanctions. Huawei is a blacklisted entity in the US, so American companies can't do business with them, they can't take orders or send supplies. So, Huawei has found a loophole. Get a company with a different name to make the orders. With this arrangement, Huawei can buy American chip-making equipment and other chip-making supplies. But before Huawei could go ahead, its plans came out in the open. Now, leading chip makers are raising an alarm. The Semiconductor Industry Association, or SIA, is concerned. It's drawing attention to Huawei's secret network. SIA represents the world's leading semiconductor companies, like America's Intel Corp, South Korea's Samsung, Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing, or TSMC, and the Netherlands' ASML Holding. These companies are building pressure on Washington. It might lead to stricter export controls, but that's unlikely to deter the likes of Huawei. China is making an ambitious push into chip making. Already, there are 23 fabrication facilities in China, and Beijing plans to build more. By 2030, China plans to invest over $100 billion towards chip making. In response, America is stepping up its own investments. US President Joe Biden has made chips his top priority and has promised to spend over $230 billion.
All over the country, semiconductor companies are investing in record billions of dollars. By the way, you know how much has been committed in the Chips and Science Act to be invested in America? $230 billion.
The race is truly underway. America and China are locking horns. Their contest could have 2 outcomes. Either it could lead to more tech innovations or make the market for chips more ugly.
And now on to Pakistan. Did you know that the country has a robust homemade cable car system? It was born out of necessity to reduce travel times in the hilly regions. These cable cars are often made of scrap metal. No one talks about the system. But yesterday, it was all over the headlines, all over the world. 8 people, including 6 children, were trapped in a cable car after its rope snapped. What was a daily ride to school turned into a life and death situation for these kids. They were left dangling over a ravine, their lives hanging in balance, waiting to be rescued. When we were tracking the story yesterday, it wasn't clear which way it would go. But we're happy to tell you that all 8 people are now safe It was a dramatic rescue, to say the least. Our next report brings you all the details.
It started out as a normal day in Battagram, a city in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. These children were on their way to school. They were accompanied by 2 adults. They took the cable car. It was meant to be a short gondola trip, but soon turned into a life or death scenario. The cable car they were using was homemade. It's known by locals as the dolly. It's used widely in Pakistan's hilly regions. This one was travelling between the villages of Batangi and Jhangri. It's a distance of 4 hours by road, but on the cable car, it's just a matter of minutes. When the cable suddenly snapped, the dolly was making its 5th trip of the day. The group was left hanging in the air, dangling 900 feet over a ravine. With little to do, the children huddled together. Some drifted in and out of consciousness. They were crying for help, but this was in the middle of nowhere. Soon, residents alerted the authorities. They used the mosque loudspeakers. Hundreds gathered on both sides of the ravine. Even then, it took 4 hours for the first helicopter to reach, but the difficult part had just begun. The helicopters were battling strong winds. Plus, they had to make sure the blades were nowhere near the cable. They made many attempts to reach them, but nothing worked out. After hours, they were able to rescue 1 person, but the others remained stuck.
The military became helpless because the people inside the chairlift refused to be harnessed. They tried very hard to convince them for almost an hour. They had stopped the helicopter over the chairlift and were throwing ropes down to the stranded people, but those people refused to comply. One man tied himself up and he was rescued, but the others refused. So there was nothing they could do.
As night fell, the weather worsened, so the mission was cancelled. The helicopters were sent back. Children were still there. Their families were crying for their safety. Emotions were running high and time was running out. So the officials debated another option, zip-lining to the cable car.
The helicopters were coming and going, but they did not give us permission to make an effort at saving the kids. However, when evening set in, they said you can go ahead. They had rescued 1 child, 7 were still stranded. We started our operation and thank God we rescued all 7 of them. By the grace of Allah, all of them are fine.
All 8 of them have now been rescued. The successful mission reverberated across Pakistan. The country's caretaker Prime Minister praised the operation. But the incident has raised questions about the safety of these cable cars. They're very common in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Travelling from one place to another is usually difficult here because of the bad terrain, so these gondolas help save time. Affordability also makes them very popular. A one-way ride usually costs 10 Pakistani rupees, not even half a dollar. The biggest casualty of these low-cost rides is safety. These cable cars are usually made of scrap metal or discarded vans. They're built by the locals, often illegally. That doesn't exactly make them very safe. They lack proper maintenance. This isn't the first incident. There have been several others in the past. In December last year, 12 children were rescued from another cable car. That incident too took place in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Police say they check the lifts every month, but then how does a ride to your school become a matter of life and death repeatedly?
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with South Africa. As we told you, the BRICS summit is underway. During a photo op Each leader's spot to stand was marked with the flag of their respective country. Indian Prime Minister Modi made sure not to step on the tricolour. In fact, he picked it up and kept it in his pocket. Meanwhile, in China, a massive fire broke out in an office building in the city of Tianjin. More than 200 firefighters and 62 fire engines have been deployed to control the blaze. And a rocket was launched into the space from Kazakhstan. The aim is to restock the International Space Station with food and fuel. And finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1966, the Earth was photographed for the very first time from the Moon's orbit. The picture was transmitted back to Earth by the Lunar Orbiter 1. On that note, we're calling it a wrap. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Liftoff, the 85th Progress resupply mission to the International Space Station. Tower is clear. All first stage engines operating normally according to the reports. There's the skirt jettisoning of the third stage.